Hi. Welcome, Helen. And I wonder if you could start by introducing yourself and saying a bit about your involvement in this area of practice.
Sure. I'm Helen Fippard. I've been using mental health services for too long, about 25 years, long time. So I'm a service user. I'm also a carer. I have a dad with dementia. I've got a daughter with mental health problems. So sometimes do some work as a carer as well. But basically, I've been an expert by experience here at Surrey since the pandemic. I joined during the first year of the pandemic, I think. So about 6 years now, something like that. Um, and I've been doing service user work now for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. I work at lots of different universities on lots of different psychology and mental health programs. And I do quite a lot of research for my trust, Sussex Partnership Trust. Um, that's most of what I do. But yeah, lots of EBE work.
Thanks, Helen. So let's jump right in. I wonder if you could say in brief, what are the elements of effective, meaningful involvement or participation?
Yeah, it's hard to be brief, but I'll try. I mean, there are some things that are just essential if you're going to have really good, meaningful involvement. And they're like some of those are practical things, which I'll talk about a bit more later. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about that now. But practical things which are based in things like valuing service users' time and expertise, which doesn't always happen. So just valuing what people are bringing to the room as EBEs is really important. And that leads to practical things like whether people are being paid, but we can talk about that later. But also I suppose just respect for service users and understanding that we're more than our mental illness. Things like understanding that we have skills. Very often it's the case that service users can be treated quite poorly when they're doing EBE work. There's kind of an assumption that you're just your illness. And actually, most of us have been, doing other stuff, either before we got ill or at the same time as we got ill. There are people with all kinds of expertise, and very often people who invite EBs to the room don't really appreciate that. So they kind of talk down to you, they can patronize you. So you don't really have conversations. I can't think really, other than here at Surrey, have I ever had conversations with people asking me to do work for them about the skills that I have? I don't think so. We do it here now. We have a skills form that we fill in where we can say, these are my skills. Um, but it generally doesn't happen. So when you step into a room as an EBE service user, there's sort of there's kind of an assumption that you're just your illness. And I think, that's all tied up with the whole thing about respect, because it's not very respectful. Actually, it's not respecting that people have things beyond their illness and they might actually have more than just that expertise to contribute. They've got all sorts of other things as well. Um, so yeah, mostly it comes down to respect and actually valuing the people who are in the room. Um, and yeah, later on, I've got the questions that you sent me. Later on, we can talk a bit more about what that looks like in real terms. Uh, yeah,
Or maybe we could get into that now. I just wonder if you could give an example of involvement or participation
yeah,
done well and done poorly.
yeah. I definitely can. Lots of examples of both, actually. Um, the to give you an example of a bad one, I was involved, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. So not that long ago, maybe about 3 years ago, with a group of psychological professionals, not psychologists, but another group of psychological professionals who had asked for involvement in a conference day they were running. There was money available from the organization that was funding the conference. So that's where the request came to me from. Um, so these guys came up with a program, sent me the program, told me where I fitted in it, and then I didn't hear anything more about from them until the day before the conference when they told me they didn't need me anymore because a professor of psychology was coming, and they didn't think he was going to come, but he'd agreed to come. Uh, So I was literally just dropped at the last minute because there was someone important coming, and they felt I was the only person who could be dropped from the schedule because I was a service user. And then it also became clear. So I was then, well, what about the preparation I've done? Are you going to pay me for the preparation I've done in preparing a presentation for tomorrow? And their response was payment. We didn't realize service. I don't know what I'm trying to remember the term they used, but probably we didn't realize that EBEs were paid. So they thought I was going to come along for nothing, do this, and then they could drop me at the last minute because someone better came along. It was a teaching moment because I then had words with the organisation that was sponsoring it, and they were like, we should have talked to them about this, and we didn't. They obviously need some training in service user involvement, but that was quite recently. And I've been working with these guys in a bigger meeting with the organisation for quite a long time. It wasn't as though this was the first time they'd met me. I've been working with them for a couple of years by then. And they obviously thought that in all those years, when I'd come to meetings, I was just coming there out of the goodness of my heart. And I was the least important person in the room. That's basically what they told me in that. So, yeah, that was a really difficult experience, I have to say. Yeah. Good examples. Well, I mean, generally what happens here at Surrey is good. In that most of the work we do is, my experience has been co-produced. So I've been involved in developing, developing course outlines, developing course content, not to the extent that, we're in the room with everyone when it's all being developed. But on the whole, it comes to us. Well, I can talk about you in this course. In the case of this course, you, myself, and Sharon over the past few years have met many times. We've developed the course content, we've developed our contributions to it, and I think that's been good service user involvement. There's a kind of an intermediate example is I'm involved in research at Sussex Partnership. I've been involved in research there since research department was created because I met the director of research at a conference a few days before, and he was like, oh, we need a service user. So I got involved right at the beginning. And at the beginning, it was great because it was basically 5 people in a room deciding everything. And I really felt like I had an equal voice with all those other people in the room. And then obviously, after a few years, lots of money starts coming in and the trust want more control over it. And once they want more control over it, the voice of service users tends to be reduced because I'm saying, you can't do that. and so the involvement becomes less good. But then over the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years, it's become better again because they've invested in good involvement workers. They've got people who will argue for service users in meetings and will argue for involvement in meetings. So these days, I think it's pretty good. I think on the whole, we're involved. I'm just imagining in my head Sam, who runs the involvement, saying, you really told people it was pretty good. But compared to everything else that I see, it is. We have a voice. I also have a direct voice because it's still the same person who set it up in the first place. So, I know I can still go to him about something personally if I need to. But yeah, we have a huge number of service users involved there, service users and carers involved in research. It's very well developed. And, there are groups for all kinds of research. I mean, even today, I've had like about 4 different emails for different bits of research. And we're paid well. We're paid at higher than the trust rate. We're paid at the rate that's set by Involve, which is like the national body for involvement. So yeah, we're very, very well paid, I think, for what we do there. So yeah, good, bad. But also I do the point about the research is things change. So something that can be good can become bad, but then it can become good again. Things change, often to do with whoever's the involvement worker, to do with money, to do, whether there's money or whether there isn't, and to do with the commitment of the organisation to doing involvement. So all kinds of things affect it. I don't think it's a static thing. So, I think you can do something really badly, but then you can learn from that and you can do it really well next time. That doesn't often happen. It usually takes longer. But yeah, trying to be positive here and not say just because there are bad experiences, as long as people learn from them, I don't think that's a bad thing.
I suppose connected with that, sometimes service user involvement participation has been criticised as being tokenistic.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say, what are the indicators or signs that service user involvement participation has been tokenistic?
I'm just looking for that in my notes. Where was it? Oh, that's a different question. Sorry, there it is. I found it. Yeah, because I know I wrote lots of comments about this. Yeah. I think the most obvious signs that it's tokenistic is usually actually that people haven't thought through, people who are asking for the service user involvement haven't thought through the practical side of it. You know, they've just thought about, well, we're going to invite this person to the room, and there we are, we've done our bit. And actually it's often the practical stuff where it falls down. So things like, yeah, no payment, poor payment, really complicated payment procedures, not thinking about where or how a meeting is going to be held or the involvement activity is going to be held. So for example, lots of EBEs don't have cars, rely on public transport, and then there'll be a meeting that's held somewhere very far away from public transport, so people can't get there. It's very difficult to get there, and then, you know, they'll have to argue over taxi fares and just not thinking about service users as people. So not thinking about things like, oh, well, if there's young mums there, we might have to organise something when it's not school pickup time. When I first started doing this work, I had a child in school, and it used to make me furious when people set up meetings during pickup time, because I couldn't go. And the thing is, the people setting up the meetings have children. So someone is picking up their children, but it never occurs to them that you can't do that. And, you know, I fought long and hard a long time ago to get childcare expenses covered. And I remember the arguments were, well, we're staff and nobody pays our childcare. And my argument was, yes, and people are doing this for you voluntarily. And they'll have to pay someone to look after their child if they come to this meeting. So just a lack of thinking about us as anything other than a resource to be bought and sat in a room, but not really thinking about what's involved if you want to get the best. Even if you are going to think of it as a resource, what's involved to get the best out of that resource? So no involvement in the agenda, no involvement in planning. And the thing that still happens all the time. I've sat on lots of strategic meetings for NHS England for years, and I quit last year. And one of the reasons was because there's a long agenda. They have 3 EBEs on their programme. We're supposed to be integral to the programme, but when it comes to the meetings, they always put the EBE item at the end. And we have asked again and again and again to have it put high up, because all the important people at NHS England leave once halfway through the meeting. They're too important to stay for the whole thing. You need to put the EBEs in the middle of 2 important things, because then they'll be there and they hear it. But EBE work is always put at the end of the agenda. And what that means is you're just talking to each other, because everyone who has any say or any influence is gone. So that's a really good example of tokenistic. The other thing that happens all the time as well is that there's no clear, sometimes people ask for involvement with no clear sense of what the EBE is there to do. So they kind of expect you to come to the room and do something, but they don't always know what that something is. And I think they should have thought that through. They should be thinking about what they want us there to do. Otherwise, you're like, what am I here for? Am I just here to sit in a seat? I don't mind, pay me. But you know, you want something to do. And the final thing that comes up all the time, and that Sharon is very good on, is that for tokenistic work, there's often no shared language and no shared agenda. And what I mean by that is clinical psychologists are the worst at this, absolute worst, relying on their tribal language. So using terms that other people in the room, I work with the director of research at Sussex, we teach together, and he uses this term tribal language to try and convince our psychology students that they shouldn't be using it. It's an exclusive language that excludes everyone in the room who isn't a clinical psychologist. And it's acronyms around services and therapies, and you know, there's 1,000,001 acronyms in psychology. And even terms, I object even to the term intervention, because I'm like, most people don't know what an intervention is. I mean, they might if they watch American TV when people say someone needs an intervention, but it's not something that is everyday language here in the UK. So, you know, I was in a health meeting the other day with one of my doctors who said, I think you need an intervention. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he was actually talking about a kind of surgery. And I'm like, well, just say to me, you need this surgery, not I need an intervention, because it's meaningless. So there's all this tribal language. And as soon as a meeting descends into that language, you know that they're not thinking about the EBEs in the room. Sharon is brilliant. She just immediately, she'll do it in, she doesn't want to interrupt the conversation. She'll do it in the chat and she'll just put acronym, acronym, acronym. But that language, it's thoughtless, I guess. And it's deliberate, and all professions have it, but it's deliberate. It's a way of kind of saying we're all the same kind of people and everyone else isn't. So I think it's quite problematic.
Oh, thanks. So that's really helpful. Some really useful pointers there about tokenism. Just want to think about sort of participation done well, and I wonder what have been some of the wins or positive impacts that you've observed from service user involvement and participation done well in the NHS or social care.
It's really nice to be able to talk about wins because we don't very often. Actually, if you stop and think about it, there have been lots of them. I mean, a lot of the wins are just around much wider acceptance of service user involvement, much wider acceptance that it should happen, and actually it's the best way of developing and providing services or training or whatever. When I first started doing this, number one, we never got paid. So you would just do it out of the goodness of your heart. But I did it for about 7 years before I started to get paid, quite a long time. So initially you didn't get paid. Now it's assumed that you should at least offer payment, and it should be a reasonable payment. So that's I think that's a really good change, because that helps people to get involved. I mean, we won't get into all the trouble around benefits, but I think the fact that it's accepted as a principle that we should be paid is showing respect. And it's just, yeah, it's become a kind of principle that you should be doing it. In terms of services, I mean, I just noted down some of the positive impacts when I was thinking about this. I think there's better services. I think there's more respect for service users. I mean, I think services are much better now. That's not to say they're good, but they're much better than when I first got involved. And especially, as someone who's used quite a lot of psychological therapy, I think therapy is so much more accessible. Not, yeah, this, I get into trouble when I say this. I get into trouble with other service users. And I was someone who really fought for therapy for a long time, whereas I went 11 years trying to get some therapy. These days, I just fill in a self-referral form. And then I have to have an assessment. I've just come out now of 16 weeks of DBT and compassion-focused therapy with my wellbeing service. And, people talk about wellbeing services as being, oh, they only give you six weeks of CBT. It's not true. I've just had 16 weeks of DBT and compassion-focused therapy, and it was incredible. It was so good. And so positive. And I just, compared to what I experienced 20 years ago, that didn't happen. So, and I think the fact that there are EBEs now on all the strategic committees, I sat on one for the last 10 years, all those committees that are deciding how much training, how many places to offer in universities, the committee Sharon and I were on, we were involved in those decisions. I think that's really made a difference. The fact that something more than CBT is offered is also really positive. So I think it's now generally accepted in training and at a higher level. I don't think it's accepted yet every day. All the time I meet people who are in everyday delivery of services who are like, oh, I don't really know what EBE involvement is, and I've never really seen it. So I think in actual day-to-day services, it's not, it's nowhere near as good as it could be. But in general, certainly at the strategic level and in universities where people are being trained, I think there's a lot of it, and that's good. And it translates also into sort of intangible ways, but ways that are really tangible to service users using those services. In that, I do think there's more empathy. I do think there's more understanding. I do think we get listened to more. And I do think that we get asked rather than told. My experience, certainly with the wellbeing service, which has always been slammed by everybody as rubbish, but that's not my experience. I've used it 4 times now, and every time I'm asked what I want, I'm not told what I should have or what I can have. So I think all of those, yeah, they've been kind of long, slow, but very good wins. Whether, yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about hospital services. I haven't had experience of them for quite a long time, so I can't really speak to them. I don't know what the improvement has been or if there really has been one. But certainly in the work I'm involved in, it's, yeah, when I look at research now, it's kind of, and research is absolutely embedded in the structure. You just can't do research without involving EBEs. It's just not acceptable anymore. And that's partly because the money doesn't come from NHS funds. It comes from, NIHR funding. So it's baked into research applications. And I think that is a really, really good thing. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
So next, I'm just aware of how long you've been involved in this work, and it's really a question about how things have developed. What would you say about how the way the NHS uses involvement and participation has kind of changed over the last couple of decades?
In some ways, it hasn't changed at all. And in other ways, it's changed a lot. It kind of reflects what I was just talking about. I think in everyday services, it's still quite tokenistic. Don't think it's, yeah, I don't think it's changed very much. And I say that in the sense that, I've sometimes been asked to be on working groups and for this, that, and the other, and I go and sit on them, and it's very obvious within the hour that they're not really interested in what we have to say. So I think for some things it hasn't changed at all, but for other things, I think it's changed a lot. And I think, yeah, things like, I mean, I suppose the most obvious thing is the role of the involvement worker. It's now generally accepted that if you're going to do good involvement, you need an involvement worker. And I think that's a really good thing. I do think that's problematic as well. So sorry, I've been doing DBT, so I'm always thinking in dialectics at the moment, but it's been a really good thing, but it's also a really problematic thing in that what tends to happen. So I was involved in another group a couple of years ago where they brought in an involvement worker and they had no idea what to do with the involvement worker. It was kind of, we've got you here. We want you to get more EBEs involved in our work. And she quit after about 6 months. She kept going back to them saying, yes, but you have to explain to me what it is you want them to do. And they would just shove bits of policy at her. So I think the problem, I think involvement workers are great and they're essential because they're the people who help make sure involvement happens, make sure all the practical stuff happens, but they're also there when things go wrong to help people. They provide that sort of backstop of, if you do some involvement work and it's awful, then there's someone to go to and to say, and they can then take that on board and take it forward. So there's all kinds of reasons in which they're really good. The problem now is that I think everywhere in the NHS now we have involvement workers, and the consequence of that is that particularly at senior management level, once you've got an involvement worker, everybody's assumption is it's their job to do EBE work. And unless everybody is interested in involvement and is willing to do it and to see it as part of their work, nothing's changed because it's just the involvement worker and the EBEs talking to each other. And I think that happens a lot now. Now we've got, I mean, it happens in other organizations as well. It's exactly the same thing as the diversity and inclusion debate. It's like, oh, we've got a diversity inclusion officer, so they'll deal with that. When you're never going to change things on diversity and inclusion unless everybody thinks it's for them to do work as well. And what tends to happen, if you think about diversity inclusion, very often when I think about a person I know who does that work, she's appointed as a Black person with mental health problems to do the diversity and inclusion work. So no one else even thinks about it anymore. And every time there's an issue around racism in the workplace, they go to her. Can you sort this out? And that's not her job. Her job is not to sort it out. Her job is to help them understand that there is a diversity and inclusion problem and to take action to solve it. And this is what happens with involvement work. It's like, oh, we've got an involvement worker now. We don't have to think about it. When actually, I think you do have to think about it. And it's the role of the involvement worker is perhaps to help you to think about it more. but it doesn't stop being your job just because you've got someone sort of looking after your EBEs. It's your job to do the work. I think about all the stuff. This is really off the point, but I was talking to someone yesterday about this who was having problems in their organization with diversity and inclusion. And it just made me think about all the stuff after Black Lives Matter, where people would say to black people, I mean, I remember saying it once to a friend of mine who's black, well, what do we do? And he was like, it's not our job to tell you, you've got to do the work. And this is how I think now on involvement. It's, everybody working in those organizations has to be up for it and has to be prepared to do it. The involvement worker's job is just to facilitate that, to make it easier, to make it function. It's not to do all the work. So I think it's given organizations, and particularly the NHS, a kind of an excuse for doing nothing. And that, I think, is a problem.
Thank you.
That was a bit of a rant, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to ask about kind of support for EBEs and what supports you think services need to be offering to service user consultants, survivors, advisors to enable kind of meaningful involvement.
The most important thing is involvement workers, which is against everything I've just said. But when I first got involved in this work, there really weren't many involvement workers. So the whole of Brighton and Hove, where I am, there was one person at Mind who was employed part-time, and that was it for everything. Whereas these days, even little parts of the NHS sometimes have involvement workers. So I think the need for involvement workers is beginning to be widely recognised. Still aren't enough of them, because they're the people who do look after all the practical stuff and just make life easier. It's really hard just in terms of pay. I use about, I don't know, maybe 12 different payment services. Every one of them is different. Every one of them doesn't function the way it's supposed to do and has problems. Surrey paid me twice last month. And then came back, sent an email to everyone saying, please repay us. There are all sorts of things that if there's an involvement worker, they just help that stuff. They help with that stuff, and they can be the person the intermediary that just, in my experience, it works well if there's a good involvement worker. Doesn't work well if there's a bad involvement worker. But if there's and now I think there is an emerging profession of involvement workers, which I think is a good thing. I think they're people with lived experience usually, but who just oil the circuits or whatever it is to make sure that things work. And for me, that's the most important thing. The other thing, of course, is budget, money. So right now, where budgets are really tight, involvement work everywhere is becoming tighter and tighter and tighter, except in research where you get the money as part of your bid. But in services generally, the first thing to go is always the involvement. Because it's easy. We don't have contracts, we're casual workers. It's really easy to just, and you don't actually have to sack us, you just cut down the level. So one organisation I left last year sort of cut down monthly meetings to, we'll have a meeting twice a year. And you're like, well, what's the point? Nothing's going to happen from a twice yearly meeting. So I think that's a real struggle at the moment, because I think it's really, it's being cracked down on, and we're just the easiest target. And then involvement doesn't happen, basically. It just doesn't. So that is the most important thing. That it's, I did think about that and wrote, I'm looking at what I wrote in my note, and I sort of said practical support and need for involvement workers who are paid well and supported by systems. So I think, that's the most important thing. And as some of your students will find, some of your trainees, sorry, I always forget and call them students, but some of your trainees will find when they go into jobs and they want to do involvement, that it's really hard for them to do. And if there's an involvement worker, it's much easier for them to do, because they just speak to the involvement worker and the involvement worker sorts it all out. So it's easier. It's not just that it's easier for EBEs when there's an involvement worker, it's infinitely easier for staff. So much easier if there's just someone you can just say, can you sort this for me, and they can sort it. And in the long run, it saves money, because every member of staff trying to sort out their own involvement, just in terms of hours, it would cost so much. So I always think it's the practical stuff that's the most important. And I suppose the other thing that involvement workers do is they offer peer support. And I think the peer support is really important. You can have that without an involvement worker. So I have been involved in things where there's just a group of service users who support each other to do the work that the institution wants, and that's really valuable. Yeah, so peer support is the other thing, and it's hard for service users to self-organize that for all sorts of reasons. So again, it's something that somebody needs to organize, even if it's not an involvement worker. Somebody, so if it's a mental health team who would wanted to do involvement and they didn't have the money to employ an involvement worker, I think it makes sense for them to have one person whose job is to facilitate that and just learn how to do it, because the systems are complicated. Payment systems are complicated, booking systems are complicated, and if you have one person, there aren't 20 of you all talking to 20 different EBEs. So I do think a lot of it is just the practical stuff, actually.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Helen. I just wonder, anything else it'd be useful for us to kind of explore about enabling kind of meaningful participation and overcoming some of the barriers you've referred to?
I don't know. I'm having a look at kind of notes that I wrote to see if there's other stuff. I mean, I think everything actually is down to how it's organized. It's down to if you want to do involvement. I'm just trying to think, are there ways that you can do it without kind of organizing? There are. You can, or you can, you can just have one person. I've been doing this for so long that I'm often the one person that people will go to. So I'll get a phone call or a message or something saying, will you do this for us? And for a long time I did it, but my response now is actually, I don't think you should be using me again, because that means that people are only hearing from me. So this is the other reason why it's problematic if you don't have structures. Because what tends to happen is everyone who's responsible for organising it, when I think about the work that I was doing with NHS England last year, that came from some work I did with the same man 15 years ago in my local trust. But they come back to you again and again and again. But the problem with that is that then they're only hearing from the specific 2 or 3 people who they always call upon. The advantage, if you think here at Surrey, we have a whole group and we've all filled in skills forms. So if someone wants, I don't know, someone wants some work on CBT, they can go and look at the forms and maybe find 10 different people who've all had CBT, and think, well, I used that person last year, so maybe I'll use someone different this time. So it's not like at my trust now, for patient participation, they do interviews, and I don't think that's right. I don't think you should be interviewing service users to sit on in a 2-hour session. I think it's absurd. But I think what you can do is have skills forms, and you can select people who have the right skills for what you want. Because in a way, I would say, I mean, I'm glad that people phone me and ask me to do stuff because they know me and they know that I can do it. But at the same time, it's also what I would call lazy involvement. It's, let's go to the person we know who can come and sit in the room, and we don't have to do very much because they know we understand our language, they understand what we're doing, and it'll be a really good, easy bit of involvement work. Whereas actually, my response these days is usually, no, I'll help you find someone. But I don't want you just to be hearing from me. I want you to be hearing from other people. And this is the thing you always get about, oh yeah, but it's really hard. Some people are just really hard to reach. Some communities are really hard to reach. And that's just nonsense, actually. What it is that some services are hard to engage with. I don't think it's the case that anyone is hard to reach if you go to the places where they are. If you're looking for, I don't know, you're doing something and you're looking for a group of people with, let's say you're starting something from scratch and you want a group of clients who represent your diverse local community and who perhaps have schizophrenia, then putting a sign up on a web page to people who are already involved is not going to get you the people you want. You need to be going out into your community to where those people are, rather than, this is always the problem. This is what we tried to do in Sussex Partnership. We have this group of people who've been involved in research forever. And before the pandemic, everything happened in Hove, at Hove Polyclinic. So what you would have, there was a huge group of very involved service users working on research, but we were mostly middle-aged, middle-class white women for whom getting to Hove was relatively easy. We all live locally. And we actually, to be fair, they did recruit people who lived further away, but then the expenses for their travel were so high that they couldn't afford to pay them. So what happened was the pandemic, and that broke down all those barriers. And we held online cafes. We held lots of them. We have a much wider community now. We have people from all kinds of different groups. It still doesn't suit everybody, but you've been able to do so much more because actually, everybody was going online because it was a pandemic. So you didn't even have to go to where people were very much. But what they did do during the pandemic was create a children and young people's working group. Which at the time everybody said you can't engage young people in research. They're just not interested and you can't do it. It's been going now for 6 years. It's won awards for being the best in the country. It has so much demand, they just can't keep up with demand. And I think that came from going to where young people were, which was on the internet. So you can, and I just think that argument about, people are hard to engage, people are hard to reach, it's just an excuse because we don't want to do the work. I mean, all of these things largely, and including EBE involvement, all of these things are set up to meet the needs of services, generally without taking into account what would actually be best for service users. So, I mean, and we did that with research. We set it up because it was easy for us to do it in Hove. And then we suddenly realized that no, we need to do something different. This isn't right. It's not working. So I think it is hard work. And I think we've got to a point now where it's widely accepted that service user involvement is a good thing. What's not so widely accepted is that for it to be done really well, you have to pay and you have to invest in infrastructure, and then it will work really well. And the only example you have to look at is the youth PPI cafe, which is the only one in the country, but is now working with others to set up others all around the country. And because it was a pandemic, so we could invest time and money in it, and it didn't cost that much. It was easy to do. And so far, they're still funding it. I mean, by funding it, it's one person who organizes it all. Again, so often it comes down to one person. It comes down to one involvement worker who's prepared to, put in the effort and make it work. But definitely don't believe the arguments about hard to reach. It's just not true. You're just not in the right places. And if you're advertising in places where the people you want aren't there, it's not, it's not going to work. If you're advertising on I don't know, on an NHS website for people with learning disabilities to get involved in X, Y, and Z, it's not going to happen. You have to go with them. I used to do a lot of work with Brighton museums, and this is off the point, but it's a really good anecdote. We had a group we used to call ourselves sometimes the Access Zoo. So there was a group of people with various health needs. So we had someone with autism, we had someone who was blind. I was there to represent mental health. There was someone who was deaf. There were 2 people who were deaf. So there was a whole group of people, but also in that group, there was a woman called Luella with Down's syndrome, who was the most amazing contributor to that group. But everything was organized to help her contribute. So I've often been in meetings now where people are like, we can't involve people with learning disabilities in groups. And I can tell you that you can. So Luella she'd have an access worker who'd come with her to help her get there. Once I was in the room, they would provide all kinds of materials for her, paper, drawing, so that she could draw what she wanted if she didn't want to contribute vocally. But also the best thing about having Luella there was that if we'd been going for like half an hour with just talk, just one person just presenting, Luella would suddenly say, "This is boring. Can we do something else?" And she'd say the things that the rest of us really wanted to say, but were too polite to say. And I just felt like the whole meeting was organized, not so everything revolved around her, but so that she could be part of it, and she was part of it. And she was a part of an artist group, so she would also bring some of her art and talk about the art that she was doing. And that's the only example I've seen, I think, in all my time of what I would say is a really inclusive group, that everything was organized to make sure that everyone in that room could contribute. Yeah, it was so it can be done because I've seen it be done, but it's tricky, it's difficult. You have to do things. You have to spend money and you have to do things to make it work. And that's not always easy. And to be fair, that group has now been shut down because of arts cuts. So it doesn't function anymore. But for the 10 years or so that it did, it was just a really shining example, I think, of really good involvement. And every time they brought anything in, so if they brought in audio tours, we would go on the audio tours before they were introduced. And then, people could comment on whether they worked. When they brought in audio visual equipment, we'd all test it. So the blind people, the deaf people, those of us who could see, we'd all test it and we'd all comment, and they'd change it all according to what was accessible for the most people, because they were willing to do that. And I think it probably happens in the arts better than, well, I was going to say that, and I'm just thinking of the example of the person I was talking to yesterday who works in the arts, and it definitely doesn't happen for them. But but it does happen to some extent in the arts anyway. Yeah.
And maybe that kind of inspiring story is probably a point to conclude. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. So useful to hear your experience and learn from kind of some of your observations. Many thanks, Helen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Stop recording.